And whereas Hope Springs Marina is active within the Stafford community, hosting civic organization events, school groups, and boating safety courses. And whereas Hope Springs Marina is a supporter of Stafford's rich history, providing free dock space and supporting the Institute of Maritime History, while it mapped wrecks of World War I cargo ships and Civil War ships. And whereas Hope Springs Marina is a certified Virginia Clean Marina with environmentally friendly practices that help to keep Stafford's waterways clean. And whereas Jimmy Franklin and Hope Springs Marina were strong advocates for the marina and boating industry in Stafford and spearheaded a successful public relations effort to eliminate the boat tax. Now therefore be it resolved by the Stafford County Board of Supervisors on this, the 20th day of January 2015, that it be and hereby does recognize Hope Springs Marina for being an outstanding business citizen in Stafford County and for its service to Stafford citizens. I can't thank you guys enough for what you've done. That's yours.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Don't go anywhere. And really, if you're one of the Stafford residents that hasn't seen Hope Springs Marina in the last couple of years, you really owe it to yourself to check it out. See the multi-million-dollar investment that they made when they built their new. What do you call that? Well, I mean the clubhouse. The clubhouse is the part I'm thinking about, but it's great for events, and people indeed do have events there all the time, and it's just a wonderful venue. I just got a award for being the chairman of the VRE for the last year, and they gave me a picture taken from, looks like your office. So it's quite a view from your office looking at the train tracks and the Aquia Creek. So if you want to say a few words, either of you?
Not really, just
No?
thank you. Thanks for recognizing
How about you?
us.
You want to say anything?
Just quickly, Jimmy does a great job as a full-time manager there, and he has for 21 years. He's had one dream in his life, and that's to run a marina, and he's done a great job. We started 21 years ago with 40 slips, half of which were rented. We've got close to 200 out there now in a 300 hotel, and Stafford County support for us has been incredible all the way down, all the 21 years. We've had to cross many, many hurdles. Some of the staff is definitely still here that's helped us with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And how's the no boat tax working out for you, Jimmy? You have any comments on that? I know you were passionate about it.
It's like somebody turned a light switch on. All the big boats that were in Prince William County are now back in Stafford County spending their money here.
That's what we want to hear. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy.
We're going to move down on the agenda to the third item, which is presentation on the Technology Park Strategic Plan. I'll turn it over to Mr. Baruti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tim Baruti, Deputy County Administrator. Happy to tee up the next piece on your agenda with a brief history, a very brief history. To advance the Tech Park Initiative, Stafford County began pursuit of a state grant in the fall of 2013. On October 1st, 2013, the Board of Supervisors unanimously passed R13-322, a resolution that formally authorized the County Administrator to submit this grant to the state for the newly created Virginia Federal Action Contingency Fund, also known as FACT grant. After submission, Stafford County was invited to brief the General Assembly. They did that, and by late 2013, Stafford was notified that they had been awarded a grant, one of only 5 such grants statewide. The Board of Supervisors approved the required match monies and assigned the award to the EDA to execute. The EDA went to bid and received competitive proposals after a national search for risk assessment and strategic plan for the Tech Park Initiative. Accel Innovation LLC was awarded the work and has spent the last 10 months working with the Tech Park Board of Directors crafting the plan. The Board of Directors approved this plan on December 19th, 2014. Dr. Gary Evans is with me today, and he is prepared to walk you through that plan and take questions afterward. Mr. Evans.
Thank you very much. I'm Gary Evans. I'm the President and CEO of Accel Innovation. And very briefly, we're a consulting and management company that focuses primarily on economic development, which includes a wide range of things, including research parks, business incubation programs, support for entrepreneurship and new company creation and growth. I appreciate that your agenda is busy, so I won't spend any more time on our background. I have 10 slides I'd like to take you through, which is really the distillation of about 400 or more pages of written reports. And so this is inevitably at a 50,000 foot level, but I want to reassure you there's substance underneath. And clearly, if there's anything that you would really want to dig into in more detail, very happy to do so. So without further ado, just very quickly, the overview of what I want to talk about, a quick summary of what we've actually done, the conclusions we've drawn in relation to what the current situation is in which the park's operating, what we think the future for the park looks like, what do we want to create, and when I say we here, I mean Stafford County, the park board, not myself or my company. How will we do that? Where do we think clients will come from? What will be the impact of implementing the further development of the park as we see it? What level of investment would be required? And then finally, what we think the next steps would be should the implementation go forward. So very briefly, the work program that we have followed was broken into two tasks. The first was really a very thorough analysis of a number of aspects of the Stafford economy and the wider environment in which the park operates, looking specifically at the sub-bullets you see there, looking at existing clusters of companies, the research and higher education infrastructure, some economic development baseline information, a very detailed dive into federal procurement activity as it applies to Stafford, with a particular focus on the Marine Corps base, an overall SWOT analysis, and an overall assessment of risk for the park and on a somewhat wider basis for the county as a whole as it relates to the context of the Research and Technology Park. And then having completed that, the second task was really to develop a strategic plan in which we went into a reasonable amount of detail with regard to the implementation. So, a very brief summary of the overall analysis that we did. Firstly, Stafford has a core group of companies that are active in software development, systems engineering, primarily serving defense contracts, primarily through Quantico. These are very high value companies. They tend to create high value jobs, and very good to have. However, at best, all of the information we have available suggests that defense industry spending will remain at current levels in real terms at best, and is very likely to decline over the next decade. I'm very conscious that Mr. Thomas and Mr. Sterling probably have a deeper familiarity with that than we do, but nonetheless, that's the conclusion we've drawn from all of the analysis that we've undertaken. And what that says to us is that it's appropriate for an initiative like the park to exist and to be proactively progressed. Stafford has some very good core strengths represented by those companies, but they are highly dependent on defense, and we think that what that means is there's a very compelling need to act to try and diversify the economy further from defense. And I want to emphasize not to move away from defense, but to build on the defense industry activity into new markets. And we think that the companies that are here represent a very strong skill set that would enable that. There is a lot of competition within the region. There's a lot of space, Class A office space, other kinds of space. And so it's essential that the park and the county have something distinctive that differentiates it within the market. If the only thing you have is high quality office space, you have nothing that nobody else within the region has. And that's a key point that we would like to emphasize. Moving on from that, whilst being somewhat skeptical about vision statements, we do like the idea of creating a mental image, if you like, of what would the future look like if the park was successful. And that's what this statement represents. A place with a robust and dynamic population of organizations delivering both products and services, leveraging science and engineering. That's essentially what research parks are about, and you have a very strong base, as I said, particularly around software. And serving a geographically diverse and a technically diverse range of markets, so that what you have is a resilient, diverse economy, which is not so closely coupled to the vagaries of federal defense procurement. So, how do we do it? Very simple. Create new companies, attract companies, support the companies when you have them, and do things to make sure they stay here. Which sounds very, very simple and clearly isn't in practice, but it's about supporting entrepreneurs, creating new companies, entrepreneurs that are here already and ones that might be attracted, and that can be done through initiatives like business incubation and the creation of co-working space. It's about helping the companies that are here to sustain their existing business. So again, not turning your back on the defense business, but helping the companies that are here grow the existing business that they have. It's also about helping companies that are here already and ones that come here to develop new markets. So looking at alternative ways of deploying the skill sets that are here and could be brought here. And it's also very specifically about attracting companies from other locations. And I think possibly one of the key messages that I'd like to leave you with is building it and expecting them to come will not work. I can say that very categorically, having been doing this for nearly 30 years now and been involved with a very large number of research parks, not just in the US but in other parts of the world. You have to create something distinctive and you have to act proactively to bring people here. That has consequences, inevitably, but that is an extremely important point that we would want to emphasize. So where will the clients come from? We talk specifically about clients rather than tenants, because as I said, if the only thing you're going to do is offer space, you have tenants. You want clients with whom you have a relationship, that you build something for the future. Certainly from within Stafford and the wider Northern Virginia region, the challenge there, of course, is that companies that are already in the region are already benefiting from many of the advantages of being within the greater Washington area, and so it may be more difficult to attract them. Elsewhere in the US, the analysis that we did of defense procurement shows that there are a half a dozen or so other states that represent the vast majority of the procurement that goes through Quantico other than Virginia. And so we envisage a very proactive, again, program of activity to target companies in those states who may be undertaking work at Quantico but don't have a presence within the region. So focused activity. We also think there's a great opportunity to attract companies from Europe. This is a much larger topic, but this is an area in which we have a lot of experience. And the key to that is to recognize that foreign countries, and certainly all European countries, and often regions and counties and cities, have staff that are dedicated to the sole purpose of helping their companies enter overseas markets, of which the US is usually the principal one. And we believe that the way to market the park here is to connect with those people, which thanks to the world of the internet is much easier to do than it once was, and to leverage their presence to bring companies here. And there is experience that shows that that can be made to work. And in principle also from Asia and from other parts of the world, although we would see that as a longer term objective. So, a nice colourful diagram, which I will try and explain very briefly. What we do when we're looking at these things is we build a very detailed spreadsheet model that looks at the characteristics of typical companies, how many people they employ, how fast they grow, how many of them tend to fail, how many of them tend to relocate to other parts of the world. And we build up from that a very comprehensive picture of how we might expect the population of organizations on the park to develop. That's what this diagram represents. Unfortunately, not time to go into too much detail, but what I would ask you to look at is the bottom three chunks, the dark blue, the red, and the green, represent the region. The sort of purpley colour above the green represents what we think could be brought here from elsewhere in the US. The light blue represents what we think could be brought here from Europe, and the orangey piece at the top represents the rest of the world. If you look at the left-hand scale, it says jobs. What this says is we think it's realistic but challenging to bring something like 2,000 new jobs here over a 10-year time frame. So what does that mean in a little bit more detail? And I will try and highlight the key points from this slide. So probably something of the order of 80 companies. A reasonable percentage of which would come from within the Greater Washington region, but we think they would tend to be smaller than the companies that were attracted from elsewhere. And so the pie chart on the right there represents the split in terms of numbers of companies. Somewhere around 350 to 400,000 square feet of new space, which would represent something like $80 million of construction expenditure. And the little pie chart there on the right shows that we would expect the majority of that space to be occupied by companies from elsewhere in the US and from Europe. And jobs, as I said on the previous slide, more or less 2,000 jobs. And given that those are high wage jobs, we would envisage that translating into something like $346 million of new money into the Stafford economy over the 10-year period. And that is not taking account of any secondary indirect employment that will be created in service industries. Now, I would say that, as with all numbers like this, this is an estimate, but we think the scale is completely realistic and appropriate. So, what does this mean in practical terms? So there are essentially three things that you need to deliver this. One is a highly capable and experienced team of people. You need some marketing budget for them to be able to go and do some of the things I've talked about. And ideally, you would also want what we've called an incubator, which would be an initiative that would support entrepreneurship, nurture early stage companies. And all of the experience in other locations suggests that when you create companies in a given location, they tend generally to stay there. And so that's your seed for the future. I appreciate that this is a fairly substantial number, but this number does not take account of ongoing conversations that we're aware of between the county and a number of partners. It doesn't take account of funding that may be available from state and federal sources. It doesn't also take account of potential overlap with some of the existing Stafford economic development resources, and it doesn't take account of any phasing in of staff positions, which essentially means that this is an unconstrained set of numbers, which probably represents the maximum expenditure that might be required to deliver everything that we've talked about. I should say that this also assumes the use of the existing park office, which is at Quantico Corporate Centre. Just to provide some comparisons to set that number in context, we did some digging and looked at how much expenditure there has been on other research parks within Virginia, and you see the numbers there. I should say it's difficult to get definitive numbers for these kinds of figures, but we believe these are certainly representative. $10 million by the City of Hampton, $35 nearly by Newport News, which is projected for the expenditure on their new park. The Biotech Park in Richmond, $15 million of public sector funding went into that. Prince William County Innovation Parks reported to have involved about $17 million of expenditure. And even Accomack County, which is developing a research park associated with the Wallops Flight Facility, have spent about $8 million. And as a final reference point, Harford County, Maryland is an interesting comparison. I think Harford is where the Aberdeen Proving Grounds are located, and at a broad level is somewhat similar to Stafford. They have just implemented a plan to bring together their economic development department, their business incubator, and create some co-working space with a budget, an operational budget of just over $2 million a year. So hopefully that gives some context for the numbers that we provided on the previous slide. So final slide, how would we implement this? And again, when I say we, I mean the park. A period to gear up, get things off the ground, recruit staff, establish a business incubation program and some associated co-working space, attraction of initial clients within a 12 to 18 month time frame, and running along in parallel with that, planning of the development of new physical space on the land that was acquired for the park in the last couple of years, and to expect to have something fully operational and delivering concrete results within a 18-month to 2-year time frame. And so with that, I'll draw to a close, and very, very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Evans? Ms. Sellers?
All right, it shows the rest of the world. Are you talking about predominantly Asia?
Yes.
Have we talked to Quantico or any of the tenants that inhabit Quantico about marketing to Asia in cybersecurity nonetheless? Well,
first, certainly two things on that. I mean, we would see Asia as a long reach and not something to be pursuing in the short term. And secondly, would want to emphasize that we're not necessarily talking about defense-related companies, and we're not even necessarily talking about cybersecurity. Clearly, the foundation that you have here is in defense and cybersecurity, but we really think there are opportunities to diversify away from that. And obviously, there are certainly sensitivities around that. But Asia would be something for the, maybe the 5 to 10 year time frame and not the shorter term.
Just be very, very careful.
Surely.
Asia is, if we're just not even talking about national defense, but I mean, from an economic standpoint, they're the biggest. How do I say this? When it comes to economic espionage, they're pretty much up there on the list.
Oh, surely. But having said that, I mean, there are a lot of Korean companies that have become very well established in the US and have made a very valuable contribution to the economies where they are. So Asia can encompass a wide range of different countries and locations.
Right.
Other questions? Mr. Mildy.
Just the main question, the overall idea of a tech and research park at Quantico Corporate Center. Why is this, or is this a better place than? Are we in a good spot or a bad spot, or how do we look as far as convincing? Our job is to decide whether it's worth the investment, and convincing the public that it's worth the investment, and why we should do this compared to maybe the counties to the left and right of us.
Okay, let me try and give you a brief answer to that. So at the moment you have a net outflow of people every day. More than 30,000 people travel out of the county for work. And what that means is that you're missing a huge opportunity in terms of capturing the economic value that those people create through the businesses that they work for. If you don't act, the rest of the region will and is acting. And what that means, I think, is that Stafford will become essentially a bedroom community for other locations where these kind of companies are being created and growing. And it seems counterintuitive to allow that to happen. In terms of what makes Stafford distinctive, I think it depends very much on the potential sources of companies. Within the region, as I said, it's actually more difficult. Other places within the region have many of the things that Stafford has. If you go further afield to the rest of the US, presence in the Greater Washington region, proximity to Quantico, particularly for the companies that already do business there, look like compelling reasons. For European companies, a presence in the US more generally, a presence near the capital of the country, very attractive, and it's a very compelling message, I think, that can be built around that. All of which together mean you have this rich and diverse population of companies. I think the danger is if you don't do something like this, you will end up missing out on many of the opportunities that the other counties will benefit from.
Mr. Sterling.
Did you go through what's the ultimate costs and other things? It's close to $1 million a year to start this up and continue it for the period. The job payoff can be very good in the end state if we do achieve that, but that's a risk. Is there a way to structure it more on an incentive-based compensation, because the bulk of that is on the pay of salaries, instead of a flat-out, here's what salaries are going to be for these various positions, really make it more of an incentive-based where the development of these jobs, the bringing in those businesses, there's some way that the compensation is reflective of the success rather than just here's the money and hopefully something happens. That's the way the private sector does it, and I'd like to see it. This is sort of pseudo-private, and I'd like to see something of that nature incorporated.
No, certainly. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't do that. I think the only thing I would say is that you do need to offer enough of a base to attract people of the caliber that you want to have. But certainly I don't think there's any fundamental reason why you couldn't do that. I think the other thing I would say is that we didn't have time to sort of dig into the detail of this spreadsheet model, but what you see is that there is this kind of pump priming or momentum building over the first couple of years, which is necessary to reach out into the market. And so you would have to factor that, I think, into that kind of incentive approach, but I think that's a perfectly good idea.
Any other questions? Ms. Bunke.
Yes. We have an airport in Stafford, and as you probably recognize, it has not really been optimized, but yet it is an asset here. Was this taken into account at all in your research?
It was, and I think for larger companies that represents a real asset. For the smaller companies, for the startups, it's less relevant. But for larger, more established companies, that is definitely a significant asset to have.
Anyone else? Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. It's a very
Thank you.
interesting report. We have a presentation by the Blue Star Mothers, but I'm not sure they're here yet. They have arrived, so.
I'm Linda Garrett, and I'm here representing the Blue Star Mothers of Fredericksburg. I was to be accompanied by our president, but she had an emergency, so we will not be actually presenting the plaque to the firemen, but I will read the description from the plaque. Blue Star Mothers of Fredericksburg is a group of moms whose sons and daughters serve in the military or have been honorably discharged. We try to have a lot of service projects that take care of our veterans and our children. And in June and November of each year, we pack boxes to go to our servicemen and women who are deployed. In November, we had the great fortune of being able to use Fire Station 12 in Stafford as a facility to pack these packages, and the firemen were most helpful, and we were very fortunate to have this, and today we wanted to honor them. The plaque will have to come later. She had it and she had the emergency, but I'd like to read it. Blue Star Mothers, Fredericksburg, Virginia, VA 4, above and beyond the call of duty presented to Stafford County Fire and Rescue Department Station 12, Berea. With sincere appreciation, we are forever indebted for your generous support. Blue Star Mothers of Fredericksburg, Chapter VA 4, January the 12th, 2015. And thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mrs. Garrett, I just want to thank you for all you're doing and for the sacrifices that you and your fellow members make. It really is appreciated.
Thank you, and thank you to the community who contribute all the items for our packages. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. This time we'll have presentations by the public. I would ask the public to remind the public that each person has 3 minutes to speak on any subject that you'd like to speak on. We ask that you come to the podium, state your name and your address. You will also notice on the podium that there are 3 lights. The green means your time is starting. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute left, and when the red light comes on, we ask you to wrap it up. There's also a button on the right of the podium in the front that will adjust that podium up and down if you need to do that. So with that said, we do not have any speaker cards, but I will start on my right. Anyone on my right wishing to address the board? Anyone on my left wishing to address the board? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Peggy Stevens, the Executive Director of Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, 4022 Hummer Road, Annandale, Virginia. I'm here to speak about the TDR ordinance, and we are as eager as you that it not be delayed any further. So I want to compliment the Planning Commission for the good work that they've done over the last several months and urge the Board of Supervisors to move forward on the Planning Commission version of the amendment to the TDR ordinance. We do recognize that in the version presented by the Planning Commission that there is a call to distinguish between land that can be developed under normal circumstances in the county and land that cannot be developed. So should you move to a public hearing, we hope that a listing of which of those properties can be developed versus ones that cannot be developed could be part of a public hearing. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Stevens. Anyone else on my left wishing to address the board? Yes, sir. Please come down.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Houchins, 606 Harrogate Road here in Stafford. I apologize for this hastily written presentation. It's strong on passion and short on smooth edges. But I support the lifting of the current strict ban of archery in Stafford County, which currently limits only to regularly established archery ranges. I'd like Stafford to include the allowance of safe but casual, private, even impromptu archery target practice as a healthy pastime, reestablishing an outdoor activity that rewards practice, dedication, patience, concentration, and responsibility. There's absolutely nothing wrong with holding people accountable for accidents or malice that affect other people. As a matter of fact, that's one of the absolute truths to learn about an activity like archery. An invaluable life lesson, and it demands that the willing would-be archer incorporate that into their psyche. It introduces and forces a person to recognize and rise to a new level of awareness and responsibility for their own actions and the safety of others. The current countywide ban doesn't reflect the diverse personal opportunities for individuals and families to create a safe environment to practice the sport. Its blanket ban overlays a generic prohibitive solution onto places and situations where there is no problem, but instead introduces a problem of government squashing an otherwise healthy outdoor activity, seemingly preferring indoor electronics, and giving preference to video games that score better for more kills instead of instilling real-world safety philosophies and practices to ensure both participants and others' safety anywhere in the vicinity. In particular, I'm speaking from I'd love my daughter to be doing this, who's 12. A very responsible young lady, much more than I was at my age. But what a contrast, being held personally responsible for every arrow that leaves your bow versus being rewarded for more kills you can rack up in a game. I suggest government waiting to hold people accountable for threatening or actually damaging others' properties or other people, rather than just outright banning an activity that can be done safely in a myriad of circumstances. I philosophically disagree with government creating and enforcing pre-crimes that restrict or prohibit activities that can and normally are safe and victim-free. One gentleman today in the meeting brought up HOAs, and I suspect that what the answer will be for that question raised is that HOA communities will still be able to reflect their own will on the topic within their own communities without this board needing to continue to unduly restrict all of Stafford County in all private circumstances. Everywhere, let accountability reign first, and prohibitions only come as a last resort to solve actual problems that seem otherwise insurmountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Houchins. Is anyone else who would like to address the board? Well, that will bring it back to the board and have board committee reports.
Mr. Cavalier?
I'll defer.
Mr. Milday?
The last couple of weeks we've had we had a meeting, Jack and I, on a Quiet Town Center that we had great news and we just can't tell you about it. So, but you have to, again, we never know if this will come to fruition, but it's the best news we've heard in a long time. We certainly are working on this. That same day I had a town hall meeting with school board member Irene Egan. It's my first town hall meeting, and this is my 10th year on the board. And it was great. At Stafford Middle School, about 35 people showed up on a very cold night, and we'll probably do it more often now that I know it's not as scary as it could have been. We also had a meeting on Monday. Tim Baruti and his group put together a strategic plan forum on retail for the county that was very well attended. There must have been 70 people in this room at least. Jack was here, Laura was here, and just it was in the paper, well reported, but really a great turnout and a great type of people. It was really a business-oriented group, I think, it seemed like. So we're well on our way to communicating and taking comments from the public on what they'd like to see in Stafford as far as retail development and what our limitations and what we're dealing with as a board and as a government trying to make that happen. We can't just make people come here. Also, we had another first. A couple days later, we had the courthouse area landowners, which Mr. Romanella has coined CALO. We had the CALO, first meeting of the CALO group. These are the people that really own a lot of the land in the courthouse area and are interested in things like utilities and not just the plan that we have the pretty pictures of for the redevelopment area, but how we're going to get there. Because we have pretty pictures right now, but no utilities. I mean, there is no utility of it. You can't allow another commercial development in the courthouse area. There's not enough capacity in our sewer, for instance, for it, and there is no plan right now to actually do that. But we are working on changing that and getting to where we want to be in this area. And we thought involving some of the people that own the land and these people that really, frankly, are the ones that make things happen a lot around here. The developers, if you will, or landowners, was a good idea, and it was a good meeting. And then I went to my VRE meeting and handed over the gavel. So I'm no longer chairman of the VRE, but that was just a typical VRE meeting, nothing earth-shattering. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Sellers?
We had a legislative committee meeting, and we have no news to give. First week in session, and where is Tim? I don't see Tim here. But we hadn't heard anything last week. He was going to check back Monday, but we haven't heard anything. So,
Mr. Sterling? Mr. Thomas?
Thank you. This afternoon in ABC Conference Room at 1:30, we held the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee meeting. The Secretary, Lori Rudy, had a presentation for us from the Virginia Investment Pool. In a nutshell, it's a partnership between localities where they're able to safely invest some of the short-term money that you would normally see go into a money market fund at 0.1%. and so far the track record of the investment pool is about 5 times that return. So she needs the board to basically review this and pass a resolution authorizing her to use the VIP program as one of the things she can choose to invest her money in. So the committee recommended that comes to the board. We didn't make a formal recommendation, yes or no, but that'll be coming to the board at the chairman's pleasure. The second item was the school's FY14 carryover money. They had sent over a reappropriations request. One of the items was 11 infrastructure projects. The committee asked for more details on that. The superintendent wasn't able to be there today, so we weren't able to get the details. The second thing was to put $500,000 of that money aside for a new financial and human resources ERP system project. And then a couple of the other projects, such as school bus replacements and some of your typical things. So the committee didn't want to sit on the recommendation because the school board members were here and wanted us to move it forward to the board. So our recommendation ended up being that we hold on to the $500,000 and set it aside potentially for the ERP system. But we felt that we really need to know where the shared services study and things like that were going. And Mr. Cavalier brought up a good point that they're hiring a new budget director, and they may have an opinion on what kind of system that is. So at the chairman's pleasure, that will be coming to the board, and we caveated that they need to tell us what those 11 projects are. So you'll be seeing that shortly. We discussed the school pay scales. That was the big colorful chart that was the subject of much discussion last time. And the committee authorized our finance staff to work with school finance staff to make the adjustments both up and down and left and right so we can normalize that data into a better median. And we also discussed the sick leave policy. There's been a lot of effort in this new policy, and it's a big adjustment, and we know that the staff has worked really hard on it and the employees need a resolution here soon. So we recommended that comes to the full board. We didn't have a yes or a no recommendation with it, but we felt that we did need to take action as an entire board. So at the chairman's pleasure, that one will be coming as well. Thank you.
Ms. Baumke?
Yes, I attended the PRTC meeting as an alternate for Mr. Milday, and the major discussion that we had was over the falling price of gas. While it's all great for us, it really impacts PRTC's ability to run their business. And, you know, they've had a lot, they actually had decreases last year in their ridership, 3.5 to 3.7%, based on the fact that gas prices went down. There was a lot of construction on I-395, and a lot of people just, you know, chose to drive into DC. They're going to be fine for the next year and a half, but if prices continue to stay that low, they may have to change some of their priorities as far as their ridership. And we're just a very small part of PRTC, but I did want to bring that to your attention. And I think it's interesting, too, that in January of last year, the federal agencies dropped their benefit that they give people that go into D.C. from $245 to $130 per month. Wow, that was a big ouch. And then, of course, the increased parking fees went up to $250 per month for people going into the city. And that disparity still remains today. More to come with that depending on where gas prices go. Also, I wanted to let you know today we had a fire and rescue report, and we are discussing a SAFER grant. And the board we're going to bring that back to you, or bring that to you at the February meeting, along with our continued discussion today. And we hope to finalize this at the first meeting in February regarding our pneumatic weapons and our archery, as the gentleman spoke about just a few minutes ago. We have a few other outstanding items there, and we hope to bring that to the board in February. I do have a couple other things that aren't committee related. I just wanted to say that I attended Sheriff Jett's Citizens Assistant Recognition reception, and I just wanted to thank some people in our community that basically saved somebody's life or prevented that from happening, having a major tragedy. And those people were Tom Nichols, Anthony Tony Marino, Steve Parker, Sharon Blanchard, Sergeant Timothy Brown, and Miss Micaiah Robinson, who was just, 6 or 8 years old? She was adorable, and she basically saved her grandmother's life by being able to know how to use the 911 system. But I just wanted to thank all these citizens for going above and beyond and basically having the courage to do what they did. I'm not going to go into that detail with you, but it was a very nice reception, and I really appreciate Sheriff Jett taking the time for his staff and everybody to be there. It was a nice evening. I also attended the Chaplain Home open house, received a tour from Ben Nagel, who's our executive director of the Office on Youth. And if you haven't been out there, I saw Mr. Snelling's. They've totally renovated all the interior of the home, and it's a wonderful place for our young people to go when they have been in trouble with the law. So that was good. I also attended an event for the Greater Falls Run Lions Club, and I want to thank them for delivering 23 food baskets to families over the holidays, 60 Angel Tree gifts to students at Hartwood, Conway, Falmouth Elementary, Drew Middle School, and Stafford High School. Their efforts, and that's all volunteer efforts from the Greater Falls Run Lions Club. They have 87 members, and they donated $52,000 to our community this past year. That's a lot for very few members. But I did want to mention to you, we did lose a gentleman from that club who you all know, and his name was Dan Owens. You see him every year when he comes and presents to us. He has a seeing eye dog, and he left us Sunday a week ago. So please keep his family in your prayers. I also wanted to let you know that the Rouser team, my Park and Rec commissioner, actually went out to play pickleball for the first time. She's a golfer, but she went to play pickleball, and she said the Rouser Building gymnasium was so clean you could have eaten off of it. So I just want to give a shout out to Jamie Porter's team over there that she has that takes care of that facility, and their names are Margarita, Graciela, and Bob. So thank you for that. Thank you for keeping it so clean, and thank you for your leadership, Jamie. And let's see, one last item was, and this hasn't happened since Dixon Smith, and yes, I'm taking all your time because you guys all deferred. Dixon Smith Middle School came out, the boys basketball team came out on top, winning the boys basketball championship. They beat Drew Middle School. Who did I say? Oh, Dixon, yep. No, it was Drew Middle School, and they beat Rodney Thompson on a buzzer beater, and then beat Shirley Heim in the final. But that hasn't happened in 9 years since Dixon Smith has. Yeah, but now you have all those kids over there. Y'all should have won. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bumpy. I thought maybe you were filibustering there for a minute. Someone's going to have to get me aside and explain pickleball. I'm 67 years old. I've played a lot of ball in my life, but I had no clue what pickleball is.
We'll take you out there, Gary. No worries.
I need an education. I'll defer my remarks. I think that's everybody, isn't it, Madam Clerk? And go to the county attorney for his report.
Defer any comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The county administrator.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'll ask Mr. Hoppy and Mr. Hubble to come forward with their monthly construction reports, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Chris Hoppy, Capital Improvement Program Manager. I'm going to be reporting on park-type projects. The Jeff Rouse Swim and Sports Center, the water line into the from Mine Road is underway. The building footings are 80% complete. Most underground storm drain and the sanitary sewer under the building slab is complete. The entrance road is ready for stone as soon as it dries enough. Work is being delayed by inclement weather. Staff is negotiating the operating agreement. Embry Mill Park, later this afternoon, you'll have the contract award for the Phase 2 work on your agenda for consideration. Woodstream Trail to Smith Lake Park, the infrastructure plans have been approved. The access and construction easements have been finalized with the developer and will be shortly submitted to planning for their review and approval. Receipt of construction bids is scheduled for January 29th and board consideration in February. Belmont Ferry Farm Trail, VDHR, is reviewing the updated archaeological report. The environmental assessment will be posted on the National Park Service website until early February. The revised Belmont Crossing bid documents and plans will be resubmitted to VDOT this week. We had to address some of their comments. A public hearing for the Phase 4 plans has been scheduled for March 9th at 7 p.m. at the Falmouth Fire Station. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Hoppy? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Steve Hubble, Acting Director of Public Works. A quick update on our transportation projects on Mountain View Road. Construction is continuing on this project. Currently, new driveway culverts are being installed and a water line relocation is continuing. For Mountain View Road Phase 2, that project is just getting started. And initial items will be construction signage and erosion controls. For Poplar Road Phase 1 and 2, construction bids were received on Thursday and are currently being evaluated. For the Poplar Mountain View Road intersection, the right-of-way acquisition process has just commenced, and right-of-way will be needed from 10 properties there. For Brook Road, right-of-way acquisition is continuing. For the PPTA projects, Truslow Road, right-of-way acquisition is ongoing. For the utility easements in Phase 1, those have been received, and we're continuing to acquire right-of-way in the remainder of Phase 1 and Phase 2. For Garrisonville Road, we're still coordinating with VDOT on the review of right-of-way plans, and the Courthouse Streetscape project is now substantially completed, and a punch list of final items has been provided to the contractor, and we're working with them to get those scheduled and get that project fully finished. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Hubble? Thank you very much, Steve. This time I'll entertain a motion for the additions to the agenda. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just had a couple other
I apologize.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I did want to recognize Steve Hubble. This is his final week as our interim Director of Public Works. Steve has served ably and really kept us moving since Mike Smith went over to utilities, and he'll be absolutely an integral part of the team with Mr. Chris Rapp, who will start on Monday as the county's next Director of Public Works. So very much appreciate Steve and his efforts. At today's committee meetings earlier today, Mr. Thomas was elected the chairman of the FAB, and Mrs. Bomke was reelected as chairman of the Public Safety Committee. Just want to mention that for the record. A couple of good news items, Mr. Chairman, and that is that this past weekend we learned that the Virginia Youth Soccer Association was awarded the 2017 and 2018 United States Youth Soccer National Championship Series. That'll be held in this region. And thanks to the work of Jamie Porter and her team, the fields at Embry Mill Park were an integral part of that application, and so they will be playing on those fields in the summers of 2017 and 2018. As Mr. Hoppy mentioned, that's item number 18 on your agenda a little bit later today. This is just the first of many tournament opportunities that we'll have now that we have are about to undergo constructing that very quality facility right in the middle of our county. I want to thank Steve Weissman and the Fire and Rescue team. I want to thank Travis Sullivan and the Parks, Recreation and Community Facilities team, and also Michael Muse and his folks. We had a major water leak in the building 2 Friday nights ago. We had a pipe that froze and then unfroze or defrosted, and lots and lots of water, a couple inches of water through about 1/3 of our social services department coming into the side of the board chambers. It was a big undertaking to get it all cleaned up, and the best part about it is that the public didn't miss a beat, because the next Monday morning we were open for business. There's still some cleanup work that needs to happen, but a great effort to keep the business of the county moving. 2 agenda changes, and those are 2 additions. Item 12A would approve the appointment of Mr. Raymond Jackson to the Parks Commission representing the Garrisonville District. Item 12B would approve the appointment of Miss Cynthia Sellers to the Embry Mill CDA. There's one handout in your folder, and that is with respect to item 15, which are some housekeeping changes to the Liberty Knolls proffers dated January 16th. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion to approve the additions to the agenda? Have a second? Have a second. Motion and a second. Cast your votes. Tally the votes. Mr. Sterling voted yes. Does anyone want to pull anything from consent? Seeing no one, do I have a motion for the consent agenda? A motion and a second. Cast your votes. Tally the votes. Motion passes 7-0. Unfinished business. Planning and zoning, transfer of development rights. I'll recognize Mr. Harvey.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Baker will be giving the update and presentation to the board.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Kathy Baker, Assistant Director of Planning and Zoning, to talk about transfer of development rights. If I may have the computer, please. Just have a few brief slides. The board is asked to consider authorization of a public hearing for an ordinance that's been initiated by the Planning Commission. As you recall, back in June, the board referred a TDR ordinance for the Planning Commission to consider. They did hold a public hearing and on the proposed ordinance, which has now been renamed 015-05. The Planning Commission did vote against this ordinance as they decided they wanted to draft their own version, which is now called 015-06. They did hold a public hearing on this and voted to recommend this to the board. Just as a recap on the sending and receiving areas, this map shows the sending area outlined in blue, the receiving area in red. These areas are not changing under either scenario. And this would be incorporated under a comprehensive plan amendment, which would be separate from either ordinance. Both ordinances have proponents that were suggested by the board back when it was referred in June, and that includes revising the receiving zone density from 5 dwelling units per acre to 2.25 dwelling units per acre in the A1 district. They both also include the B3 area as a receiving zone. They both reference the architectural design guidelines in the receiving zones, and they both also allow the minimum 2-acre lot size for sending properties that are designated as park on the comprehensive plan. There are 3 primary differences in the ordinances. As you see, the first line under the board's version of 1505, right now as a means to transfer development rights, you would use covenants that would be recorded. The Planning Commission's version adds an option for a permanent conservation easement that would be held by a qualified holder, and that would be another option. So just different ways of achieving the same goal. On the second row there, the board's version includes a provision that entitles all parcels to at least one development right, regardless of the developability of that parcel. And that would be a parcel that's in effect at the date of the adoption of the ordinance. The Planning Commission's version does not include this provision. So,
would you, Mr. Chairman, give me an example of, does that mean if it's all steep slopes and hydric soils? Is that the kind of thing we're looking at here?
Correct. Steep slopes and hydric soils are used in under the scenario of when you calculate the development rights. So if a lot is encumbered by that, individually it may not meet that, but if you combine lots, it could potentially include development rights under.
And do you have an idea how many lots this would remove from the potentially remove from the sending area?
It may not necessarily remove them. You would just have to look at each one. We did just an initial GIS, did an initial review for us. They created a map that showed approximately 94 lots that might have over 50% of hydric soils and steep
Over
slopes.
50% makes them takes them out of contention.
Potentially, it could.
Well,
if the lots are larger than the 2 acres, it's going to depend upon the size and other factors.
I know the reason why it matters. If we can hone that down and we can change the densities in the receiving area, every time we can get rid of some of this potentially sent units, it helps us lower densities in the receiving area. Is that something you can get to a better idea of how many lots we might not have to?
Yes, we can have GIS do some further calculations on those lots.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The third distinction, both ordinances actually have a new reference about new buildings or structures not being allowed on properties less than 20 acres in size. The Plan Commission's version does add limitations on the residual use on the properties designated as park, and that includes limiting agricultural uses only on parcels greater than 20 acres as when they're residual, and then no other residual uses on these properties designated park except for non-commercial campgrounds. Not that we're aware of. You could transfer all of the development rights off a property, or you can retain a number of development rights. I'm saying on the agricultural use itself would be limited to properties that have at least 20 acres. Agriculture does include logging, agriculture and forestry. Correct. Mm-hmm. Park would say that again. That is correct. If it was allowed at the time of severance, it could continue to be allowed, yes.
One more question, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
To be clear, what we would vote on today would be just to send these extra set of options to the public and back to us, and then we can still pick and choose.
Just to authorize public hearing, yes, for this version. And that actually just...
We have to authorize separate public hearing.
The existing board's version doesn't require authorization, just the Planning Commission since it was initiated.
Mr. Romanello, I see you reaching for your microphone.
Well, I think Mrs. Baker said it. Just to clarify, the board's version was sent down by the board to the Planning Commission, so that's ready to go to public hearing at the chairman's scheduling. Today's question is, would you like to send down the Planning Commission's version to public hearing in addition to the board's version?
Any other questions? I'm sorry, Ms. Baker. I thought that concluded your presentation. I hope I'm right.
Yes, I was just going to state for the record, the comprehensive plan amendment, which is a separate component of this, does have a deadline of March the 3rd. So if we were to have public hearings, we would anticipate those on February 17th.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, Anthony, can we run the public hearings concurrently, or do they have to be two actually separate public hearings?
Two separate public hearings.
Okay.
But you can have them on the same evening.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a long night. What's the pleasure of the board?
Since I'm the one that talks about this the most, I don't see any reason to not go ahead and move these forward. As a matter of fact, a couple of the ideas make a little bit of sense. I hate to say it.
Is that in the form of a motion?
Sir.
I have a motion from Mr. Mildy to move the Planning Commission forward. You have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 7-0. Planning and zoning briefing on transportation proffers and transportation impact fees. Mr. Harvey, or Mr. Dayton, I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Keith Dayton, Deputy County Administrator. The board has seen a few residential rezonings in recent months, and staff was asked to provide a short briefing on proffers and impact fees and how they interrelate. If I could have the computer, please. Both of these programs, transportation proffers and impact fees, provide localities with funding opportunities to offset impacts to the transportation network resulting from growth. But each program operates under a different set of requirements. These are codified in our ordinance, and our ordinance typically passes these requirements down from the state. Transportation proffers are voluntary contributions when a property owner comes to the board and asks to reclassify their property. That means that existing lots in by right development are exempt from transportation proffers. We do have adopted proffer guidelines in effect. They've been in effect for a number of years, but recently we've been contemplating changes, lowering the draft proffer guidelines by about 2/3, and the differences mainly are in the way these proffers are calculated. The old system looked at the entire comprehensive plan and all of the transportation improvements included in that, whereas the new methodology focuses on the 10-year CIP. That's typically a much smaller collection of transportation projects. There's also some other changes that reflect sources of funding and debt service credit and that sort of thing. When the staff calculates our proffer guideline amount, we obviously take into account the number and mix of the housing types. We typically don't see proffered amounts close to the guidelines. They're generally less because they are voluntary. And they also include in-kind contributions, which can be right-of-way dedications. They can be off-site improvements. We do rely on estimates prepared by the property owner's consultants when we value these transportation proffers. Although we do look at them in-house, our own staff just kind of does a litmus test on that. Now, the timing for proffers vary widely. They can be a lump sum, they can be at occupancy permit, and quite often in the case of transportation proffers, they're determined by when traffic warrants are met. Transportation impact fees, on the other hand, are new. They were only adopted by the board and went into effect last May. These fees are mandatory. They're cash only, and they do include by right subdivisions. So any newly platted lot would be affected by transportation impact fees, but they are subject to state-imposed limitations, which I'll get into in just a moment. And the board elected to exempt family subdivisions from transportation impact fees. We did do a calculation of the of a fair value for impact fees. Staff selected 20 roads that we determined to be severely impacted by growth in looking at the comp plan. The fee only includes new residential impacts and the county must fund any delta in the amount of the fees. We must also fund non-residential impact costs and the commercial impact costs. That was a decision of the board. And these fees are collected at building permit issuance. And the board's landed on a fee of $29.99 for all housing types for transportation impact fees. I won't go into all of this because I've covered much of it, but in the row under precedents, I wanted to point out that impact fees are not permitted under our ordinance or state code to be assessed on top of transportation proffers. You must deduct the value of transportation proffers out of the collected impact fee. And also that when you look at proffers, the value of the right-of-way donations and entrance improvements on secondary roads, say adjacent to the subdivision, those are also part of the transportation proffer package, and those can also be improvements that would be required under the subdivision plan review process. So because proffers come first, they can be calculated and applied early in the process, and even though they might be the value of those might be picked up later in the process by VDOT review and county review, they would still offset transportation impact fees. This is reflected in an example calculation. If you looked at a new residential rezoning for 50-lot subdivision, the maximum possible, or the guidelines for transportation proffers would amount to close to $280,000, or the transportation impact fees would be almost $150,000. Now, if you had a right-of-way dedication valued at $80,000 and some secondary road improvements near the entrance valued at $110,000, that would total $190,000 in-kind transportation proffers. That would offset against the transportation impact fees, leaving a net of zero in terms of cash funding towards our transportation needs. And it is possible that in this example anyway, the entire value might have been included as a requirement of the subdivision plan approval anyway. So that ends what I had as far as a little background on impact fees and proffers, if there's any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Milner?
Do we ever see on our rezoning applications where they kind of get a dual credit, where there may be allowance for some right of way, but it's also being counted as open space, or are we pretty good about making sure we delineate between the two? I'm thinking of maybe one of these recent Liberty Knolls maybe was even one where we had some right of way dedication. We're not counting that as, what was that new phrase? The trees. Tree save area. You know the tree save area. Yes, I do.
If the developer or the property owner wanted to take credit for a tree save area, we've not seen that as far as the transportation proffer. They could certainly claim it as such, and then the board could certainly debate the merit of that, but we've not seen that yet.
Okay.
Typically, it's
one of the others.
Right of way, and the right of way is typically something that's identified on a comp plan for a particular road. If it's a 30-foot right of way and our comp plan says it should be a 60, then that we'll typically see 30 additional.
Well, up until now, we've pretty much taken their word for the value of the right-of-way dedication in some cases, because it really was we were negotiating the proffers anyway. Now we're talking about impact fees, so we need to really be careful about the valuation of these dedications. I think you told us on the proffers that we're taking their word for the value.
Well, there is an estimate that's prepared, an engineer's estimate, and it is reviewed by staff, but it is typically a sealed engineer's estimate, and that has a certain weight that comes with it.
Is there a way to even keep the question of the value open until such time where they might be asked to pay the impact fees, or are we locking it in stone at the time of the rezoning in the case of proffers?
Well, because they're negotiated, proffers are negotiated, the board isn't locked in at all.
In the process of negotiating the proffers, can we ask them to stipulate that the value is X, Y, Z?
Yes, sir. Typically, we would. Typically, there would be a value associated. There are times I've seen in the past proffers where they proffer to put in a signal when warrants are met and that sort of thing. So the older language of proffers was kind of all over the map, and I believe we've gotten a little more focused when we review proffers. So we've certainly made some strides in that.
Or at least for now, proffers are so much more than impact fees. It's not going to matter in the immediate future, but eventually it may. Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Thomas?
My question was a follow-up to that. If you go to the last slide real quick, I just want to make sure I understand something.
Got it.
In this example, let's say we approve these proffers tomorrow, and 8 years from now, when they start building, the impact fees are maybe $7,000 per unit. So they're actually more than $190. So in that future scenario, when they actually are getting the occupancy permit, do you reevaluate which one they should be paying, or is this locked in when you do the rezoning?
Mr. Thomas, I'd have to get back to you on that. Okay. My initial thought is that the proffer is locked in, but the impact fee would not necessarily be, because they would then file for they're actually calculated at subdivision plan approval. So you have up until that time to adjust the impact fee, and if it does go up above that, then there may be some opportunity to recover some cash funding.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Dayton. I don't believe there's any action required. Is that correct, Mr. Romano? We'll move on to item number 15, Planning and Zoning. Consider reclassification of tax parcel 2917 from A1 to R2, Liberty Knolls 2. Ms. Sellers.
I thought Jeff was going to go over kind of.
I wasn't aware that you were going to have another presentation, but you're welcome to do so.
It's not supposed to be a presentation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I do have, and Ms. Sellers, I do have a few quick slides. If you
Very good. You're earning your money today. I like that.
As you recall, the board held a public hearing on this matter on your December 16th meeting. This was a reclassification from agricultural zoning to R2 for single-family detached neighborhood. The property is roughly 30 acres in size on Courthouse Road, and the applicant is Triaccord Incorporated. There was a number of changes that were requested and talked about during the public hearing, and this attempts to summarize it. Basically, there was a request for more clarification about facades, especially on the sides of the buildings, and the applicant has provided those additional considerations regarding windows and doors, so there wouldn't be a blank wall along the sides of some of the homes. Also, there was a discussion about a 100-foot wide transportation buffer along Courthouse Road, and the applicant has made that proffer that there be a 100-foot buffer from the edge of the existing right-of-way within the project. And that caused a developer to have to lose a lot within the overall project, and that also caused a reflection in the proffer dollars listed in the proffers themselves, because since there's one fewer unit, the dollar amounts dropped accordingly. This is the excerpt from the general development plan, which shows the 100-foot wide buffer along Courthouse Road. There was another lot that was located in that general vicinity. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Any questions for Mr. Harvey?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
yes.
Just to be clear, Mr. Harvey, I think he meant to say they're losing one lot, not losing a lot. It wasn't intended to be a subjective statement, but it went from 52 to 51.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have questions.
Yes, Mr. Mildy.
The open space. How much open space combined total is on this site?
I'd have to look at the information to give you a specific number. I know it's.
They use percentages or rough numbers, just an idea.
I would imagine it's probably at least 30%.
And so 30%, but in this type of open space, is how is it protected as open space indefinitely, or is it?
It would become part of the homeowners association property, which they would be in charge of retaining it. The proffers do speak to one part of that open space area as being a tree save protection area. So those proffers also would run with the zoning of the property. So if the homeowners association in the future cut it down and there was a complaint, then we would pursue it as a zoning violation.
So you can come here and change that at any point. That's how you get past a deal, a proffer that the board agrees to. You'd have to come back to the Board of Supervisors to change it.
Correct, which involves public hearings.
The only thing more secure would be, I guess, an actual conservation easement placed on the property, which I don't think I've seen in subdivisions. I've seen it in golf courses, but no one, have you ever seen that done, where you actually have a level of protection that's a little bit higher than the board's ability?
Yes, Mr. Milday, in a number of cases we've seen conservation easements recorded as part of a Corps of Engineers wetlands permit, where the Corps says you have to have certain areas preserved because of your impacts to wetlands as an offsetting measure. And those easements run in favor of the Corps of Engineers, so it is more authority than a county ordinance would have.
Right. We can't undo a conservation easement without trading land somewhere else, if I'm not mistaken. Right. You have to put land and preservation somewhere else once you get an actual conservation easement.
Typically, that would be the case because the conservation easement runs in benefit of usually a party interested in conserving land. So in order to get that easement undone, they will typically say, we would like some mitigating measure, and maybe equal or even more than what the original easement extent was.
Is it unrealistic to even have that discussion? Is there a reason that jumps out at you why we wouldn't in the future? This is certainly too late in the game here. To why we wouldn't ask developers to actually put their land in a permanent conservation easement instead of something that any board can undo, and we have certainly undone them. Since I've been on the board, we've had multiple people come in and we just change our mind, let them build a house here, build a house there, let alone cut down trees.
Certainly we can entertain that in the discussions. One caution I would give is that our general development plans that we see with rezonings are just that. They're not based on detailed engineering. So there could be, for engineering reasons, a need to impact some of the area that we were looking at for conservation. So if that were the case, then we'd have to come back to the board and redo that potentially small impact through a proffer amendment, and also possibly changing the land records in the courthouse.
All right, thank you for indulging that.
Any other questions for Mr. Hart? Mr. Thomas?
I had a question. We had a letter from VDOT talking about the widening project for that portion of Courthouse Road. And as we all know, those are subject to change, which recently things have changed. They were due to have a vote on the draft 6-year improvement program in November. I'm assuming this project made it through that draft. Wouldn't have any upsetting news that this project was cut it off.
Courthouse Road widening?
Yeah.
That's a county revenue sharing project.
Right, but this letter from VDOT, I think it's maybe where I'm confused, talks specifically about that project. It's not the interchange. It's in the package on page 341.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the challenge we have with that project is that a component of the 630 widening project was in the Exit 140 project, and that was eliminated when the state reduced the budget for Exit 140. And so now we're in a position to go back to the state to try to get the additional money. So the in a sense, the project is a go, but right now the 630 widening project is probably $7 million short of its total budget number. The chairman and the vice chairman and I have a meeting later this month with Mr. Connors to begin to work on how we can close the gap.
Okay, so it's still on everybody's radar, but it's now unfunded. A portion of it is.
Yeah, that $7 million leaves us about $7 million shy. Did I get it wrong, Mr. Sterling?
Yeah, microphone, please.
What happened was the governor shifted $7 million worth of a state project's responsibility onto the county 630. So the 630 widening is still where it was, but suddenly the state said, oh, by the way, you've got to do $7 million more on that because we're not going to do it as part of the interchange project. So it didn't cut $7 million from 630 widening. They shifted $7 million worth of costs. In federal contracting, we call it a cost overrun. In local government, we call it a state mandate. Doesn't matter which way, we got the short end of the stick.
Any other questions for Mr. Harvey? Thank you, Mr. Harvey. We'll bring it back to the board. Ms. Sellers, this is in your district. I have a motion to approve and a second. Do I have any further discussion? Mr. Thomas, I'm sorry.
I kind of alluded to my major concern here. When the interchange funding was first, I call it getting monkeyed with, but apparently there was no politics in that. Our biggest complaint and all of the speeches that were given to the CTB was we've based a lot of our development plans on the fact that was going to be done with that scope and it included the widening of Courthouse Road. And as we're seeing now that those things tend to shift, especially when the governor's mansion shifts, which is every 4 years. So it seems to me that we're always playing catch up. That's already a tough road. For those of you that drive it all the time, you know that. I've only had the privilege of picking my kids up from an after-school activity at Colonial Forge once or twice, and it's pretty well traveled. That interchange is years behind where it needs to be. We all know that. But it seems to me that if we approve these units, we're just adding more traffic to the road before the solution is actually there. So I just find it hard. This isn't the first one on that corridor we've done recently. So I'm for that reason, I'm not going to be in support.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Sellers.
Well, I've heard that a couple times on Courthouse Road, and anytime the high school gets out, whether you live in Stafford, Virginia, or Washington, D.C., or Eastern North Carolina, where I started high school, you're going to have traffic. When you have 1,000 students driving out of one parking lot, you're going to have traffic. When people come home from work, you're going to have traffic. So to hold up a project for that reason, to me, when the state has told us that it is a go right now, I can't support that as a reason not to approve it. But I do want to say also, and I've told all the board members that with this particular project, when it came to us, it looked very different, very, very different. And I really do have to give a lot of props really to Erica. She has gone back to this developer several times and really stood her ground on things that maybe none of us would have thought of. And so it's not easy to go back and say this is what we want. It's probably not easy to come up here and have a tree save area where we're all saying what the heck is this, but she thought of that. And so I do have to give you credit for that. You did a good job, and I'm going to support it. I think you've beaten him up enough, and if there's any way local government's supposed to work, it's supposed to be like that. So,
any other discussion?
Chair,
Mr. Mildy.
I was vocal about my opposition last time, and those comments are still stand. But a bigger question, and hopefully I don't run afoul with the county attorney, but the idea that if a developer comes in with a rezoning that meets all of the technical requirements, are we obligated to vote yes? And what I'm looking for is some value added to the community on the things I voted to support. I voted to support apartments, next to the hospital because they're giving us a Germanic Community College site, and I thought it was consistent with the vision of the redevelopment area of the courthouse. I did the same thing with the Quiet Town Center that hasn't come to fruition, but we traded apartments for this other stuff we wanted, this commercial and real development. This type of subdivision, just paint its proffers and doing what will be a beautiful development, I'm sure, with a lot of happy families and kids running around. It'll be just great. Isn't compelling enough for me to want to support it. And that's why I'll vote against it. I've mentioned open space preservation, but it doesn't have to be that, but it has to be something that I consider a value added to the community.
Well, I'd like to challenge.
And this to me looks, so it's I'm not trying to be critical of the project, but I'll vote against it respectfully for that reason. And hopefully that's legal. I think it is. I think that's within I'm allowed to vote against it for those reasons.
Let me, before I go back to you, Ms. Sellers, anyone else have a comment or just any other discussion? Mr. Sterling?
Well, as Mr. Mildy went through, he voted for apartments because he thought that was value added. He won't vote for the single family homes. He doesn't think that. One day maybe we'll have a detailed discussion of philosophical, a policy, whatever we want to call it, a future Stafford discussion. Are we going to be a community of apartment complexes, or are we a residential single-family home type community? I think that maybe that needs to take place because we seem to have a difference of opinion of what the future Stafford has.
Ms. Sellers.
from a value added standpoint, you know, this neighborhood also adds a walking trail straight back to Winding Creek Elementary School. Not many of our elementary schools are walkable. It's particularly in North Stafford, where if you look at the redistricting lines, I don't really know who made that decision, but that was important to me, I'll tell you, and we sat down and I said, I want this to be able to connect to the school. We worked with the school board and with Sheriff Jett to make sure that the kids would be safe when they walked to Colonial Forge. So there's proffers in there for that as well. You know, one of the things that Farm Pond is an added feature. We don't have much like that, you know, in the Garrisonville district. I understand water is pretty normal in Griffiths Widewater and out on Aquia, but in Garrisonville we don't get much of that. And so to me, I actually think this will be a neat neighborhood for where it is. No, we're never going to compete with the Potomac River or the Rappahannock River, but, you know, something. So I do think there's value added for where it is and for what it has. And I can't say enough about the walking trail to the elementary school, which we had a lot of discussions on and worked very hard with the school board on. So I will say I disagree, but okay.
Mr. Chair.
Any further? Yes, Mr. Miller.
I actually think it's a beautiful project. I didn't mean to question it on its merits. The open space is not permanent in my mind. If it can be undone by a future board, to me, it's temporary. But I'll miss you, Cord. But I won't miss you mischaracterizing my comments. What I said, of course, was that I was willing to make the trade. The apartments I thought made sense, considering they gave us a 25-acre plus 7 acres we had contiguous for a Germanna Community College. It was supported by the hospital and supported by Germanna Community College. It had a broad support. I think you had to make a phone call during the vote, but everyone else supported it. So I'm not in favor of wholesale development of apartments in Stafford County. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mill. Ms. Bomke.
Yes, I wasn't crazy about this project when it first came to the board, but I have come around. I understand Mr. Thomas's comments; those are well-founded, and also I appreciate your position, Mr. Milday. But I think that this is a good project. I think I am not in favor, and I don't live up in that area, but I am not in favor of any more development on that road. But this is a good project, and it's not a huge project. And I think it's reasonable, and it will bring value to the county, and for that reason, I'm going to support it.
Mr. Cavalier.
I believe every project should be judged on its own merits. And I also believe that just because a project meets certain requirements that we set forth does not mean that we have to vote for it. Certainly we're given that option. I also like to always put a lot of weight in what the district supervisor wants in that area, because they should know that better than anybody else up here. So for those facts, I will support this project.
Any other comments before we move to a vote?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I clarify the motion, sir? Just to be clear, the motion is to approve 015-07 with the revised proffers dated January 16th.
Very good. Cast your votes. Tally the vote. Motion passes 5-2. Item 16, County Administration, authorize the County Administrator to execute a master telecommunications marketing agreement with Milestone Communications Management, Inc. to market county-owned property for the placement of telecommunications towers. Mr. Romanello, since I'm one out of three in picking who's making the presentation, I'm assuming it's Mr. Dayton, since he's at the podium?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, here to provide some brief background on the matter before you, R1527. It's been before the board a number of times, so I'll run through this rather quick. Computer, please. The board has been considering a proposal from Milestone for a couple of years now. The authorization for this agreement comes off of a City of Manassas solicitation that was completed in March of 2013, and we're allowed to ride off that if we so desire. At the November 13th meeting last year, the board referred the matter back to the Telecommunications Commission for a recommendation. The Telecommunication Commission on December 18th recommended that the county does go ahead and execute an agreement with Milestone, provided that the agreement allowed for use of space on the tower to support the county's ambition to expand broadband internet service. A little bit about Milestone. They are based in Northern Virginia. They have marketing agreements with 40 localities in the greater Washington, D.C. area. This is their area of focus. 24 localities are in Virginia. They currently have 26 towers in place and another 60 in the pipeline. And their business focus is with the big four, which is now Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. The proposed leasing plan, which you have seen before, county-owned properties would be approved for marketing only by Milestone to telecommunication carriers. They would market these sites to telecommunications companies, basically the four I just mentioned. If one of those companies is interested in leasing space on a tower, Milestone would then submit for site plan approval, and that also includes a conditional use permit. The board must approve a conditional use permit for each site under consideration. So this agreement does not approve any sites for towers. It only approves marketing of the sites that would be included in the agreement. If a CUP for a specific site is approved, then Milestone would construct the tower and lease the space to up to 4 carriers. Milestone would be responsible for obtaining all the government approvals from the site plan to CUP and the building permits associated with each site. As far as revenue goes, the county and Milestone would share with 60% to Milestone and 40% to Stafford County. The leasing plan changes that have come up over time as this conversation has evolved. The county would be allowed to cancel the agreement anytime with 30 days notice. The agreement would have a 5-year initial term with up to 3 5-year renewals. The leases associated with this agreement would have an initial 10-year term and 4 5-year renewals for a 30-year maximum period. The initial advance fee would be $200,000, and the county would have the option to choose to have a $40,000 per site fee for 5 sites and no co-location fee, or take $25,000 per site and get the $5,000 per co-location fee. Initial look, it seems to be to our advantage to take the $40,000 fee up front should we decide to go ahead with this. And then the county would have 20% of the structural capacity, basically 1/5 of the tower, for our own purposes, and that would include public safety and also expanding broadband internet service, which we've expressed an interest in. Subject to board approval, we can also add water tower locations to the marketing agreement with a revenue distribution of 75% county, 25% Milestone, and that reflects that there's no infrastructure or much less infrastructure involved in that, since they would be using our water tank facilities. And we have identified 11 conversations with the utility department that might qualify for that. So as far as the initial site selection, the county staff looked at all county-owned properties and then pared the number down based upon parcel size, incompatible co-located uses, proximity to nearby subdivisions, and also input from the school board. That leaves us 54 properties on our preliminary list of acceptable locations, and as I mentioned, another 11 possible if water tanks are included. These towers are monopole. They have multiple configurations. They range from 100 to 150 feet tall, depending on the signal strength from a particular location, and they are capable of supporting multiple carriers. There is a significant amount of revenue possible if you assume 5 of the 54 sites are leased with 3 carriers per tower. We could net $2.8 million over a 15-year period. That's county revenue. That is significant, but there's other benefits as well. That would be improved cellular phone service and the possibility of broadband internet to county residents. And also it would centralize the basically the management of cellular towers in the county to Milestone. Right now we have a variety of county staff working on 4 different cellular tower proposals that are working their way through the process. That's all I have as background. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Dayton? Mr. Mill was just a
How would
second
you
ahead of you.
would you summarize why it's better to let someone else do this for us than us trying to handle it piecemeal?
Well, as I mentioned, we have 4 going through the process right now. It starts in Parks and Recreation. They're involved with it. It ends up in planning, often ends up in county admin. We have another one that we're working through with our board staff. So you have a variety of people that handle these. The contacts come in from all over the place. Quite often they're routed around the county till they finally find somebody to pick up the issue and go forward with it. We are interested in improved cellular phone service, so we'd like to see them in locations where the board finds it acceptable. So we are promoting it, but right now it's just handled all across the board by a wide variety of departments and staff, and that to me is a big advantage.
So it's a matter of organization or efficiency.
Well, it absolutely would be more efficient. Yes, sir.
And somehow, you might agree that just letting the government, when you involve the profit motive in a third party, it's things so often work better. You make more to get individually as a team than you would if you hadn't done it.
Yes, sir. Right now, we basically wait till somebody comes to us. The way Milestone works is they reach out. They'll identify locations that the county would like to see potentially leased, depending on the details, of course. Then they will go out and aggressively pursue companies to come in and work with us on that, as opposed to now where we just wait till the phone rings.
Thank you.
Ms. Sellers.
Are there other communities that use Milestone? I think it says Manassas, but what other communities?
Yes, the City of Fairfax, Fairfax County Public Schools. There's a lot of them around the Beltway. We do have a representative here from Milestone if you'd like a detailed list, but they tend to pick up the Beltway area, Maryland and Virginia, Northern Virginia. I do believe that at least in the Washington, D.C. area, this is, I think, perhaps as far south as they've extended their service.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Mr. Dayton? Thank you, Mr. Dayton. I'll bring it back to the board. Do I have a motion for approval?
I'd like to motion R15-27 with the addition that we include the water tower sites in the final agreement, if that's possible to do it, instead of coming back and doing that.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Second, Mr. Mildy. Any further discussion? Cast your votes. Tally the votes. Resolution passes 7-0. Item number 17, Public Works, authorize congestion mitigation and air quality, and regional surface transportation program project funding request for FY16 through FY21. That was a mouthful.
Mr. Hubble, please.
Mr. Hubble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve Hubble, Acting Director of Public Works. I'll try not to repeat that lengthy title. Just a real brief presentation on transportation funding. Briefly, CMAQ and RSTP funds are allocated each fiscal year by the Commonwealth Transportation Board, coordinating locally with VDOT and FAMPO. There's a list of some prior projects that those funding sources have been used on. Currently, it's a 5-year plan, and currently the projects listed there are have allocations assigned to them in fiscal year 2020 for the county. And this year we were approached by VRE, and the board was requested to endorse a VRE project for platform extensions at the Leland and Brook Road stations in the FY 2021 cycle, which the planning phase is going on right now.
May I, Chairman? Just that was the governor brought this, agreed to this, which has a match by a developer in Prince William County. It's one of the best deals Stafford has ever gotten. All the development in the homes go in Prince William County, and the developer there is building a station. That cost of building of a VRE station at Potomac Shores is the match for this work being done at our stations.
And as you all know, the proposed platform extensions would help to increase capacity and accommodate additional loads. And we thought this was a worthy project and would recommend approval of the 2 resolutions, one for CMAQ and one for RSTP.
I have questions, Mr. Hubble. Thank you, Mr. Hubble. I'll bring it back to the board. We have 2 resolutions. Do I have a motion for approval for R15-18? Y'all speak up. Second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, cast your vote. Out of the vote. Motion carries 7-0. I need a motion for proposed resolution R15-19. So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thomas. Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Last item on the agenda, County Administration. Authorize the County Administrator to execute 3 contracts for athletic field construction Phase 2, synthetic turf fields, athletic field rights at Embry Mill Park, and to budget and appropriate funds.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, those items that the chairman just listed are captured in Resolution R15-20. As the board will recall, last summer we bid the construction of the ball fields at Embry Mill Park, the rectangular fields. We were not comfortable with the bids. They came in high. We rebid them this fall, and we're pleased to report that the low bid came in $800,000 lower than the low bid this summer. That does put us well within our budget mark. The background report does draw the board's attention to we're about $500,000 over where we had hoped to be. That results due principally to stream mitigation costs as are required as part of the environmental work that we have to do, as well as some items that were not included in the original construction cost estimate. We are carrying a contingency on the project of just over $500,000 also. We have identified the sources and uses, and we are very excited about moving forward with the project. Mr. Hoppy, Mr. Dayton, Ms. Peratt are all here. Ms. Porter, if you have any questions, and staff recommends approval.
Thank you, Mr. Romanello. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, do I hear a motion for so moved by Mr. Sterling, second by Ms. Sellers? Please cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries 7-0. That finishes our agenda for the day. Just want to announce to the public that there is no meeting this evening. But we do have a planning session. Our annual planning session will begin in ABC as soon as the closed session is done. Thank you very much. Our next regular scheduled meeting is February the 3rd at 3 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Thomas.
I'd like to offer a resolution to authorize our closed meeting. Whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for number 1, discussion of the award of a contract for the operation of the Jeff Rouse Swim and Sports Center involving the expenditure of county funds, where discussion in open session would be adversely affect the county's bargaining and negotiating strategy. Number 2, discussion concerning the expansion of an existing business where no previous announcement has been made of the business's interest in expanding in Stafford County. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A5 and A29, this discussion may occur in a closed meeting.
Do I have a second? Second, cast your votes. Tally the votes. Passes 7-0. We are adjourned.
Well, don't you want to certify, come out Come ahead and
Do I have a motion to certify?
So moved.
A second? Second. All in favor, cast your votes. Tally the votes. Motion passes 7-0. Meeting is adjourned.